The coffee shop was packed that Tuesday morning, but all I could see was her. She sat 3 tables away, fingers dancing across her laptop keyboard, completely absorbed in whatever world she was building on that screen. Her dark hair caught the morning light streaming through the window, and when she finally looked up, our eyes met for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I was Marcus Chen, 28, a software developer who thought he had life figured out. Good job, decent apartment, weekend basketball games with the guys. Simple, predictable, safe. But sitting in that Seattle coffee shop, was watching this stranger who seemed to glow with some inner fire I'd never seen before. I realized I'd been living in black and white my entire life. The next morning, I found myself at the same coffee shop. I told myself it was about the excellent espresso, but I knew better. She wasn't there. Wednesday came and went, no sign of her. Thursday, I was starting to feel ridiculous, like some kind of stalker haunting a coffee shop for a woman whose name I didn't even know. Friday morning, there she was again. Same table, same intense focus on her laptop screen. This time, I didn't just stare. I bought 2 coffees, one for me, one that I hoped she'd like, and walked over. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "I'm Marcus. I've seen you here a few times, and I thought, well, I brought you a coffee, if you want it." She looked up, and I saw eyes the color of stormy seas. For a moment, she just studied me, like she was reading something written across my face that I couldn't see myself. "Riley," she said finally, accepting the coffee. "Riley Summers. And thank you, but I should warn you, I'm not great with small talk." I sat down across from her, uninvited but not unwelcome. "That's fine. I'm not great with big talk either." That earned me a smile, small but genuine. "What do you do, Marcus?" "Apps. Software development. I write code that makes apps work better, faster, nothing too exciting." I gestured toward her laptop. "What about you?" "I'm a documentary filmmaker." Her fingers drummed against her coffee cup. "Currently working on a project about urban sustainability, how cities can transform themselves from the ground up." The way she said it, with this quiet intensity, made it sound like she was talking about changing the world. Maybe she was. We talked for an hour that first day. She told me about growing up in Portland, about her parents who were both environmental lawyers, about how she dropped out of law school because she realized she could make more impact behind a camera than behind a desk. I told her about my childhood in San Francisco, about how I'd always been the kid who took apart electronics to see how they worked, about my job at a tech startup that was trying to revolutionize food delivery. "Food delivery," she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Another app to make life more convenient. You say that like it's a bad thing? Isn't it?" She leaned forward. "Everyone's so focused on making things easier, faster, more efficient. But what if easy isn't what we need? What if struggle is what makes us grow?" I never thought about it that way. In my world, efficiency was everything. Faster you could solve a problem, the better developer you were. But Riley seemed to see inefficiency as something valuable, something worth preserving. "So you think we should make things harder for people?" "I think we should make things meaningful for people." She closed her laptop. "Your food delivery app, does it connect people? Does it build community? Or does it just make it easier for someone to avoid going to the local restaurant, talking to the owner, becoming part of their neighborhood?" I didn't have an answer for that. I never considered whether my code was building connections or breaking them down. That conversation became the first of many. Every Friday morning turned into Riley and Marcus's time at the coffee shop. She'd tell me about her latest interview subjects, the urban farmer transforming vacant lots into food forests, the architect designing buildings that generated more energy than they consumed, community organizer bringing neighbors together to solve problems the city couldn't fix. I started looking forward to Fridays in a way I'd never anticipated anything before. Riley had this way of seeing the world. That made everything seem more vivid, more important. She noticed things I'd never paid attention to, how the barista always seemed tired on certain days, how the morning regulars had formed their own little ecosystem of nods and familiar orders, how the homeless man, who sometimes sat outside, had incredibly detailed drawings in a notebook he carried everywhere. "You see, people," I told her one Friday in October, as we watched the barista expertly handle the morning rush while clearly fighting off a cold. "You see systems," she replied. "The way things connect and flow. We just notice different patterns." 3 months of Friday mornings, and I was completely hooked. Not just on Riley, though I definitely was, but on this new way of experiencing life. She made me want to be more than just a guy who wrote clean code and played weekend basketball. She made me want to matter. That's when I made my first mistake. "I want to help with your documentary," I announced one Friday in November. Riley paused, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "Help how?" "I could build you a better system for organizing your footage. Maybe an app that helps you track interviews, locations, story threads. Something custom-built for documentary work." I was excited, the words tumbling out faster than I could organize them. "Think about it right now. You're probably using some generic software that wasn't designed for what you do. But I could create something specifically for your process, something that would save you hours of time and help you see connections you might miss otherwise." Riley set down her coffee. "Marcus, I appreciate the offer, but I don't need my work to be more efficient. But if you could save time on the technical stuff, you'd have more time for actual filming, actual interviews. The technical stuff is part of the process." Her voice was gentle but firm. "When I'm going through footage manually, I'm living with it. I'm seeing things I wouldn't catch if I just searched for keywords or let an algorithm sort things for me. The inefficiency isn't a bug, it's a feature." Felt something cold settle in my stomach. "So you don't want my help?" "I want you to understand that not everything needs to be optimized." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Around us, the coffee shop hummed with its usual morning energy, but our little bubble had gone quiet and strange. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I just thought, I guess I wanted to be part of what you're doing." Riley's expression softened. "You are part of it. These conversations we have, the way you're starting to see the world differently, that matters. But you don't need to change what I do to be valuable to me." I nodded, but something had shifted. For the first time since meeting Riley, I felt the gap between us, not just in what we did, but in how we thought, how we approached the world. She was right that I saw systems, but I also wanted to fix them, improve them, make them work better. She seemed content to let things be messy, complicated, inefficient. December brought the first real test of whatever we were building together. Riley got a grant to expand her documentary project, which meant traveling to other cities to interview more subjects. She'd be gone for 3 weeks, visiting Detroit, Austin, and Denver. "I'll miss our Friday mornings," she said the week before. She left. "I'll miss you," I replied, and realized it was the first time either of us had said anything that directly about what was happening between us. She smiled. But it was complicated, like she was happy and worried at the same time. "Marcus, what do you think this is? What are we doing here?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the feeling of being with Riley, so on how different and alive I felt around her, that I hadn't really defined it. "I think," I said, "carefully, that you're the most interesting person I've ever met. I think these Friday mornings are the best part of my week. I think I care about you more than I've cared about anyone. And what do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between us. What did I want? I wanted more Friday mornings. I wanted to know everything about her. I wanted to be the person she called when something good happened, or when something went wrong. I wanted to matter to her the way she mattered to me. "Everything," I said finally. "I want everything with you." Riley was quiet for a long moment, studying my face again with that same intensity she brought to everything. "Marcus," she said finally, "you're everything I want to. What wanting isn't enough. What do you mean?" "Mean that wanting someone and being ready for someone are different things." She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "When I get back from this trip, we should talk. Really talk about what this could be." She left on a Monday. I spent the next 3 weeks in a strange state of suspension, going through my normal routines, but feeling like I was waiting for my real life to start again. I worked on my code, played basketball with the guys, hung out at the coffee shop on Friday mornings by myself, feeling like I was haunting our table. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But I also did something I'd never done before. I started paying attention to the world, the way Riley did. Noticed the homeless man with the notebook. His name was Danny, and his drawings were architectural sketches of buildings that didn't exist but should have. I started talking to Sarah, the barista, who was always tired, because she was working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. I walked through my neighborhood and actually saw it. Not just the most efficient route from point A to point B. I realized that Riley had been changing me long before I consciously decided I wanted to change. She'd been teaching me to see, too. Notice, to care about things that didn't directly benefit me. And for the first time, I understood what she meant when she talked about making things meaningful instead of just making them efficient. But I also realized something else. I loved who I was becoming around Riley, but I wasn't sure I knew how to be that person without her. All my growth, all my new awareness, was centered around impressing her, around being worthy of her attention. That felt fragile, dependent. Like I was building my new self on someone else's foundation when Riley texted me that she was back in town. My heart jumped and sank at the same time. I was desperate to see her, but I was also terrified that she'd see right through me. See that I was still the same efficient, system-focused guy I'd always been, just with a new code of social consciousness. We met at the coffee shop on a Thursday, this time not our usual Friday. She looked different, not physically, but there was something more settled about her, more confident. The trip had been good for her. "Tell me everything," I said, and she did. She told me about the urban farmer in Detroit who was teaching kids to grow food in abandoned lots, about the artist in Austin who was turning industrial waste into public sculptures, about the neighborhood in Denver where residents had created their own local currency to keep money circulating within their community. "It's incredible what people can do when they stop waiting for someone else to fix their problems," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Sounds like you got some great footage." "I got something better than footage. I got clarity." She looked at me directly, about the project, about what I want to do next, about us. My stomach clenched. What kind of clarity about us? Riley leaned back in her chair, and I could see her organizing her thoughts the same way she probably organized her documentary subjects. "Marcus, do you remember what you said before I left? You wanted everything with me?" I nodded. "And do you remember what I said back? That I was everything you wanted, but wanting isn't enough, right?" She paused. "While I was traveling, I kept thinking about that conversation, about what it means to want someone versus what it means to need someone. I'm not sure I follow. When you want something, it's about you. What would make you happy? What would fulfill you? What would complete some picture you have in your head?" She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "But when you need something, it's about the thing itself. What does it require to exist, to grow, to become what it's meant to be?" I felt like I was in one of those conversations where every word mattered, where saying the wrong thing could break something that couldn't be fixed. Wow. "So you're saying I want you, but I don't need you." "I'm saying you want the version of yourself that you are when you're with me. But I need someone who is that version of themselves even when I'm not around." The words hit me like cold water, because she was right, and I knew she was right, and that made it worse. "Riley," Marcus. She reached across the table and took my hand properly this time. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because I care about you enough to be honest." I looked down at our joined hands, hers small and strong, mine larger, but somehow feeling less substantial. "What would that look like?" I asked. "Being who you need instead of just wanting what I want?" Riley smiled, and it was the saddest, most hopeful expression I'd ever seen. "I don't know," she said. "But I think that's where we start." Riley's question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I knew how to cross. What would it look like to be who she needed instead of just wanting what I wanted? The honest answer was terrifying. I had no idea. We left the coffee shop that Thursday with an agreement to meet again the following week. But something fundamental had shifted. The easy rhythm of our Friday mornings was gone, replaced by something more intentional, but also more fragile. I felt like I was auditioning for a role I'd never played before. That weekend, I did something I'd never done in my adult life. I canceled my standing basketball game with the guys and spent Saturday walking around Seattle by myself. Not efficient. Walking, not destination-focused walking, but the kind of wandering Riley seemed to do naturally. I wanted to understand what she saw when she moved through the world. The first thing I noticed was how much I'd been missing. There was a community garden tucked between two apartment buildings that I'd walked past hundreds of times without seeing. An elderly Korean woman was tending tomato plants that somehow looked healthier than anything I'd ever grown, even though we were well into December and Seattle's winter drizzle had been constant for weeks. "Excuse me," I found myself saying, approaching the fence. "How are you growing tomatoes this time of year?" She looked up, surprised but pleased to be asked. Her English was accented but clear. "Greenhouse tomatoes," she said, gesturing toward a small transparent structure I hadn't initially seen. "But also, you must know the plants, and what they need when they need it. You cannot just water on schedule and hope." We talked for 20 minutes. Her name was Mrs. Park, and she'd been gardening this plot for 8 years. She told me about the community that had formed around the garden, how neighbors who'd never spoken before started sharing seeds, tools, and advice, how the act of growing food together had created something none of them had known they were missing. "You live nearby?" she asked. I pointed to my apartment building, visible a few blocks away. 5 years, I said. "Then the first time you stopped to look at a garden?" The question wasn't accusatory, just curious, but it made me realize how much of my life I'd been sleepwalking through. "Yeah, first time." Mrs. Park nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we must learn new eyes," she said. "Take practice." I walked home thinking about that phrase, learning new eyes. It sounded like something Riley would say, but coming from Mrs. Park, it felt less like philosophy and more like practical advice. A skill that could be developed, practiced, improved. Monday morning at work, I found myself looking at my code differently. Instead of just asking whether it was efficient, I started asking whether it was meaningful. The food delivery app I'd been working on for months suddenly seemed less like an elegant solution and more like a complicated way to avoid human connection. During lunch, instead of eating at my desk while scrolling through Reddit, I walked to a small restaurant I'd never tried before. The owner, a man named Carlos, was clearly stressed about something. When I asked if everything was okay, he explained that delivery apps were taking 30% of every order, which meant he was barely breaking even on deliveries. "But if I don't use them, people don't know I exist," he said, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. "Hey, so I pay them to steal my profits, or I lose customers." Right, I ate my lunch and thought about the code I'd been writing, the elegant algorithms that made ordering food seamless and instant. I'd never considered that my efficiency might be someone else's problem, that the system I was building might be extracting value from people like Carlos without giving anything meaningful back. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I asked for a meeting with my boss, a woman named Jennifer, who'd always seemed impressed with my work. "I want to talk about the ethical implications of what we're building," I said. Sitting across from her in the glass-walled conference room, Jennifer looked confused. "Ethical implications?" "Marcus, we're a food delivery service. We help people get meals. But we're also taking 30% from restaurants that are already operating on thin margins. And we're encouraging people to avoid going to neighborhood businesses, which means they're not building relationships with their community. That's..." Jennifer paused, clearly trying to figure out how to respond. "That's not really our problem. To solve, we're providing a service people want. If restaurants don't like our terms, they don't have to use our platform. But they do have to, because we've changed customer expectations. We've made it so people expect delivery to be instant and easy, which means restaurants have to participate in our system or become invisible." Jennifer leaned back in her chair. "Marcus, are you having some kind of crisis? Your work has been excellent. Why are you suddenly concerned about business models that have been working fine for years? I didn't know how to explain that I was. Learning new eyes, that someone had shown me a different way of seeing the world, and now I couldn't unsee the connections I'd been ignoring. I just think we could do better, I said finally. Build something that helps everyone, not just us and our investors. That's admirable, Jennifer said, in a tone that suggested she thought it was anything but. But that's not the company we are. If you want to save the world, maybe you should look into nonprofit work. The conversation ended politely but badly. I could see Jennifer making mental notes, reassessing whether I was still the efficient, reliable developer she'd thought I was. And maybe I wasn't anymore. Maybe that was the point. Tuesday evening, I found myself back at the community garden. Mrs. Park was there again. This time with two other people, a younger woman who introduced herself as Maria and an older man named David. They were planning the spring planting, discussing which vegetables grew well together, which ones needed more space, how to maximize the yield while keeping the soil healthy. Marcus, Mrs. Park called out when she saw me. Come meet garden friends. I spent an hour listening to them talk about companion planting, crop rotation, water conservation. It was technical, but the technology was different from what I knew older. More organic, based on understanding natural systems instead of trying to control them. You want to help with spring planting? Maria asked. We always need more hands. Almost said yes immediately, but then I caught myself. Is this genuine interest? Or was I just trying to become the kind of person I thought Riley would want? The question stopped me cold. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, David said, but don't think too long. Spring comes whether you're ready or not. That night, I called my sister Emma. She lived in Portland now, married with 2 kids, working as a high school teacher. We talked maybe once a month, usually about surface-level stuff, work, whether our parents were driving each other crazy in retirement. I said after we'd covered the usual topics. Do you think I'm a good person? There was a pause. That's a weird question, Marcus. What's going on? I mean it. Do you think I care about the right things? Do I make the world better or worse? Hey, Jesus. Are you having a midlife crisis? You're 28? I'm serious. Emma was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. Marcus, you're a good person. You're reliable, you're honest, you help people when they ask. But you've always been kind of ... contained. Like you live in this bubble where your world is very organized and efficient. And you don't really see outside of it very much. Her words stung because they were true. Is that bad? It's not bad. It's just limited. It's like, remember when Dad had his heart attack 3 years ago? You were great. You researched all the best cardiologists. You figured out insurance stuff. You solved the logistical problems. But you never really dealt with the emotional stuff. You never talked about how scared you were, or how it might change things for all of us. I remembered that time. I had focused on solving problems, making things run smoothly, ensuring Dad got the best possible care. I'd been proud of how well I'd handled the crisis. So what you're saying is, I'm good at fixing things, but bad at feeling things. I'm saying you're good at managing things from a distance. But real life is messy and complicated, and sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to actually help. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment looking around at my carefully organized space. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. Everything was optimized for efficiency. It was a perfect system, and it was completely sterile. Wednesday. I went back to the coffee shop during lunch, hoping to run into Riley even, though it wasn't our usual day. She wasn't there, but Danny was, the homeless man with the architectural sketches. He was sitting at a corner table, drawing in his notebook while nursing a single cup of coffee that Sarah had probably given him for free. Bought a sandwich and walked over to his table. Mind if I sit? Danny looked up, surprised. He was younger than I'd expected. Maybe my age, with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that had been repaired with tape. You're the guy who talks to Riley on Fridays, he said. You know Riley? She interviewed me for her documentary about urban sustainability. He gestured to his notebook. She was interested in these What are they? Danny hesitated, then turned the notebook toward me. The drawings were incredible. Detailed architectural plans for buildings that seemed to grow out of the landscape. Structures that incorporated living systems. Green spaces that flowed seamlessly between indoor and outdoor environments. I was an architect, Danny said. Before what? Before I realized that everything I was designing was making the world worse. Big corporate buildings that sucked energy and pushed out communities. Housing developments that destroyed ecosystems. I was really good at it. Made a lot of money, had a corner office and a BMW. He flipped through more pages, each drawing more beautiful and impossible than the last. So what happened? I had what you might call a moral breakdown. Started seeing the real cost of what I was building. Tried to pitch sustainable designs, community-focused projects. Buildings that would actually help people and the environment. Got laughed out of every meeting. Danny closed the notebook. Turns out there's not a lot of demand for architects who won't design profitable buildings. So now I design buildings that will never exist, and I live in my car. I struggled for words, that's terrible. But also kind of beautiful. Well, beautiful doesn't pay rent. He smiled, but it was bitter. Your girlfriend, Riley, she thinks I'm some kind of visionary. But visions don't change anything if you can't make them real. I left that conversation feeling shaken. Danny had done exactly what I was starting to think about doing. He'd chosen principles over profit, meaning over efficiency. And it had destroyed his life. Was that the inevitable result of caring too much about the right things? Thursday evening, Riley texted me, "Want to grab dinner tomorrow? Somewhere we can actually talk?" I suggested a small Italian place that wasn't too loud. We met there Friday evening, instead of our usual coffee shop morning. Riley looked different again, not just confident from her trip, but somehow more herself, like she'd shed something she didn't need. "How was your week?" she asked after we'd ordered. I told her about Mrs. Park and the community garden. It's about my conversation with Jennifer at work, about meeting Danny and hearing his story. Riley listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, asking small questions that showed she was really paying attention. "You've been busy," she said when I finished. "I've been trying to understand what you meant. About being who you need instead of just wanting what I want. And what have you figured out?" I took a deep breath. I think I've been living in a bubble. Not a bad bubble, not a harmful bubble, but a small one. And I think you've been trying to show me that there's a bigger world out there with bigger problems and bigger possibilities. Riley nodded. That's part of it. But I also think I've been trying to change for you, to become someone you'd want to be with. And that's not the same thing as actually changing, is it? No, she said gently. It's not. So how do I know the difference? How do I know if I'm changing because it's right or because I want to impress you? Riley was quiet for a long moment, twirling pasta around her fork. "Can I tell you about someone I interviewed in Denver?" I nodded. Her name was Patricia. She's in her 60s, retired teacher. About 5 years ago, she noticed that kids in her neighborhood didn't have anywhere safe to play. No parks, no community centers, just busy streets and empty lots. So she started pushing the city to build a playground. Riley took a bite of her pasta, organizing her thoughts. The city said they didn't have funding. Patricia said fine, she'd raise the money herself. Took her 3 years, but she did it. Bake sales, car washes, grant applications, and crowdfunding. Finally had enough money for a playground. "It's great," I said, not sure where the story was going. But then the city said they didn't have anywhere to put it. All the empty lots were privately owned, or zoned wrong, or had environmental issues. Patricia spent another year fighting zoning boards and property owners and bureaucrats. Riley paused, looking directly at me. Finally, she realized that she wasn't trying to build a playground anymore. She was trying to build a system where kids mattered, where communities could solve their own problems, where cities responded to what people actually needed. The playground was just the beginning. Did she get it built? Oh yeah. But by the time it opened, she'd also helped 3 other neighborhoods start their own campaigns. She'd lobbied for new zoning laws that made community projects easier to approve. She'd created a model that other cities started copying. Riley put down her fork. The point is, Patricia didn't start out trying to reform urban planning policy. She started out trying to give kids a place to play, but she let the problem teach her what it really needed, instead of just imposing her original solution. So you're saying I should let the problems teach me what they need? I'm saying you should stop trying to figure out who you're supposed to become and start paying attention to what the world is asking you to do. We finished dinner talking about smaller things, her documentary project, my sister's kids, whether the Seahawks would make the playoffs. But underneath the casual conversation, I could feel something shifting. Not just between us, but in how I thought about everything. Walking back to our cars, Riley stopped under a streetlight and turned to face me. Marcus, I need to tell you something. My heart jumped. Okay. I got offered a job, a really good job. Documentary series for a streaming platform about climate solutions in small communities.
Yes.
It would mean traveling for 6 months, maybe longer. That's incredible, I said, and meant it. Even though something inside me was already mourning the loss of our Friday mornings. The thing is, Riley continued, they want me to start next month, which means I need to decide soon whether I'm staying in Seattle or taking this opportunity. What does that mean for us? Riley stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. That depends, she said, on whether there's an us to consider. The question hung in the cold December air between us. I realized that everything I'd been doing for the past week, the garden, the conversations, the soul-searching, had been leading to this moment. Not just the moment of answering Riley's question, but the moment of figuring out who I was. When everything familiar was about to change, I don't know, I said honestly, but I'd like to find out. Riley smiled, and for the first time since she'd come back from her trip, it was the uncomplicated smile I remembered from our early Friday mornings. Then let's find out, she said. Riley's job offer sat between us like a third person at every conversation we had over the next 2 weeks. We didn't talk about it directly. Instead, we danced around it with careful questions about timing, logistics, and what she wanted from her career. But the weight of her decision pressed down on everything we said. I found myself doing something I'd never done before, trying to figure out what I actually wanted independent of what Riley wanted. It was harder than I'd expected. For months, my desires had been shaped by her presence, my growth motivated by wanting to be worthy of her attention. Now, faced with the possibility that she might leave regardless of what I did, I had to excavate my own motivations from underneath the pile of good intentions I'd built up. The Monday after our dinner conversation, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of going to work, I called in sick and spent the day at the community garden with Mrs. Park. She'd mentioned that they were winterizing the beds, preparing for the dormant season, and something about that process felt important to witness. Need rest, Mrs. Park explained as we worked to cover the soil with mulch. Americans always think the growing season is the most important time. But dormant season is when roots grow deeper, when the plant learns what it needs for next year. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, our breath visible in the December air. The physical labor felt good, purposeful in a way that writing code never did. My hands got dirty, my back got sore, and somehow that made me feel more real than I had in months. Mrs. Park, I said during a break, how do you know when you're doing something because it's right versus doing it because someone else expects you to? She looked at me with those sharp, kind eyes. Ah, girl trouble. I laughed despite myself. Is it that obvious? A young man suddenly interested in the garden, asking questions about authenticity. Always girl trouble? She sat down on a bench, patting the space beside her. Tell me. So I did. I told her about Riley, about the documentary work, about how she'd challenged me to become someone I wasn't sure I knew how to be, about the job offer and the impossible choice it represented. Mrs. Park listened, without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. In Korea, my grandmother grew ginseng, she said finally. It takes 6 years to mature. Every year, grandmother's neighbors say, why did you wait so long? Dig up roots now. Make money now. But, grandmother, no, ginseng harvested too early has no power. Must wait for the right time, even if waiting is hard. So you're saying I should wait? I'm saying you must know the difference between the right time and the convenient time. Maybe you are not ready for this girl now. Maybe you need more growing season first. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding. I went back to work and asked for a meeting with the entire development team. Jennifer looked skeptical when I requested it, but she agreed to give me 15 minutes during the weekly all-hands, standing in front of my colleagues, most of whom I'd worked with for 3 years but barely knew as people. I felt my carefully prepared speech evaporate. I've been thinking about what we're building, I said instead, and I think we can do better. The room was silent. These were smart people, good developers, but they looked at me like I'd started speaking in a foreign language. Better how? Asked Kevin, one of the senior engineers. Better for everyone. Not just for us and our investors, but for the restaurants we work with, for the communities we operate in. I pulled up a slide I'd prepared showing the financial impact of our fees. On small businesses, we're taking 30% from restaurants that are already operating on razor-thin margins. That's not sustainable for them, which means it's not sustainable for us either. Marcus, Jennifer interrupted. We've been over this. Our fee structure is industry standard. But what if the industry standard is wrong? I looked around the room, trying to make eye contact with each person. What if we could build something that actually helps small businesses thrive instead of just extracting value from them? I spent the next 10 minutes outlining an idea I'd been working on, a platform that would charge restaurants a flat monthly fee instead of per-order commissions. That would include marketing tools and inventory management that would encourage customers to visit restaurants in person by offering loyalty rewards for both online and offline visits. It's an interesting concept, said Lisa, the head of product, but it would require completely rebuilding our revenue model. Our investors would never approve that kind of pivot, so we find different investors, or we bootstrap it ourselves. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Jennifer looked like I'd suggested we start selling drugs. Marcus, I think you need to take some time off, she said. You're clearly going through something, and it's affecting your judgment. My judgment is fine. Maybe for the first time in years, the meeting ended badly. Jennifer asked me to stay after, and we had a conversation that was professional but definitive. I could either refocus on my current projects or start looking for a new job. There wasn't a third option. I chose the third option anyway. That evening, I called my sister Emma and told her I was probably about to quit my job. Holy shit, Marcus. What happened to your 5-year plan? Your 401k? Your carefully structured life? I met someone who showed me that my carefully structured life was kind of small. That now you're blowing everything up for a girl? No, I said, and realized as I said it that it was true. I'm blowing everything up for me. The girl just helped me see that it needed to be blown up. Emma was quiet for a moment. Are you sure about this? You've never been impulsive about anything in your life? I'm not being impulsive. I'm being intentional for the first time. What's the difference? I thought about Mrs. Park's ginseng story, about waiting for the right time versus the convenient time. Impulsive would be quitting without a plan because I'm angry or scared. Intentional is quitting because I finally know what I want to build instead. And what do you want to build? Something that matters. Something that helps people instead of just helping myself. Wednesday evening, Riley and I met at a different coffee shop, one near the university that she'd discovered during her documentary research. It was full of students and activists, with bulletin boards covered in flyers for protests and community meetings and calls for volunteers. You look different, Riley said when she saw me. I might have quit my job today. Her eyes widened. Might have. I gave my boss an ultimatum. She gave me one back. I chose the option that wasn't on the table. Riley leaned forward. Tell me everything. I told her about the community garden, about my conversation with Mrs. Park, about the disastrous team meeting, and my decision to leave the company. Riley listened with that focused attention I'd come to love, asking questions that helped me understand my own motivations. So what now? She asked when I finished. And now I figure out how to build the thing I pitched to my team. The restaurant? A platform that actually helps small businesses. It's a big undertaking. You'll need funding, partners, probably a whole team. I know it's terrifying. I paused. but not as terrifying as spending the next 10 years writing code that makes the world a little bit worse every day. Riley smiled, but it was complicated. Marcus, can I ask you something? Always. Are you doing this because it's what you want, or because you think it's what I want? The question I'd been dreading. I'd asked myself the same thing 100 times over the past few days. Both, I said finally. I think that's okay. Riley frowned. How is that okay? Because wanting to be someone you'd respect isn't the same thing as trying to be someone I'm not. I reached across the table for her hand. You didn't create this dissatisfaction with my work. You just helped me see it. You didn't make me care about small businesses getting screwed over. You just taught me to pay attention to things I was ignoring. Riley's fingers intertwined with mine. But what if I take this job and leave? What if you build this whole new life and I'm not here to see it? Then I'll build it anyway. Because it's the right thing to build, even if it fails. Even if it fails spectacularly and I end up broke and unemployed. Riley laughed, and it was the first fully happy sound I'd heard from her since she'd returned. From her trip, you realize you sound completely insane, right? Responsible, careful. Marcus is talking about risking everything on a startup that might not work. Maybe being responsible and careful was just another kind of insanity. Maybe playing it safe was actually the riskiest thing I could do. We sat in silence for a while, watching the coffee shop's evening crowd. Students bent over laptops. Activists planning their next campaign. Artists sketching in notebooks. People building things that mattered to them, even if they didn't make money. I need to tell you something, Riley said finally. My heart sank. You're taking the job? I don't know yet, but I need to tell you why I'm considering it and why I'm scared to take it. I waited. I'm considering it because it's the opportunity I've been working toward for years. Documentary filmmaking is brutally competitive, and this kind of platform, this kind of budget, this kind of creative freedom, it doesn't come around often. That makes sense? But I'm scared to take it. Because of you. It's not because I'm worried about leaving you, but because I'm worried about staying. I didn't understand. What do you mean? Riley pulled her hands away from mine, wrapping them around her coffee cup instead. Marcus, you're becoming someone incredible. You're asking hard questions, taking real risks, building something meaningful. And I love watching that transformation. But I don't want to be the reason you're transforming. I don't want to be your motivation for growth, because what happens when I disappoint you? What happens when I'm not the person you think I am? Or when our relationship gets complicated? Or when you realize that I'm just as lost and uncertain as everyone else? I stared at her, understanding flooding through me like cold water. You're worried that I'm building my new life around you instead of building it for myself. Yes, and I'm worried that if I stay, I'll make it too easy for you to avoid figuring out who you are when I'm not around. The honesty was brutal and beautiful. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that my growth was genuine and independent. But I couldn't, because some part of what she said was true. So what do we do? I asked. I don't know. But I think we start by being honest about what we actually need from each other, instead of what we want. Okay. I took a deep breath. I need you to challenge me. I need you to see possibilities I can't see on my own. I need you to care about things that are bigger than both of us. I need you to be someone who cares about those things even when I'm not around to remind you. I need you to build your own relationship with the world, not just reflect mine back to me. Is that possible? Can we be together and still be separate enough to grow? Riley was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the Seattle evening. Students were walking by in groups, laughing and arguing and planning their futures with the kind of confidence that comes from not knowing. I think, she said finally, that's the only way we can be together. If we can figure out how to need each other without depending on each other. That sounds impossible. Most worthwhile things do. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended state. I didn't go back to work. Jennifer had made it clear that my job was effectively over. I was using up accumulated vacation time while I figured out next steps. Instead, I spent my time researching restaurant management software, reaching out to small business owners, learning about startup funding and business models. But I also spent time in the community garden, helping Mrs. Park and the others with winter preparation work. I had dinner with Danny, who told me more about his architectural visions and helped me
understand
how physical spaces shape community relationships. I called my parents and had the longest conversation we'd had in years, telling them about Riley, about my career change, about trying to build something meaningful. "You sound different," my mother said. "Older, but also more ... alive." Friday morning, Riley and I met for what we both knew might be our last Friday morning coffee for a long time. She'd been offered a deadline extension on the job decision. "But only until Monday, have you decided?" I asked. "I think so. I want to hear what you've figured out first." I told her about my week, about the research I'd been doing, about the conversations with restaurant owners who were struggling with delivery platform fees, about how I'd started to understand that my technical skills could be used to solve real problems instead of just creating elegant solutions to artificial ones. "I think I'm going to do it," I said. "Build the platform, try to find funding, risk everything on something that might fail completely, even if I'm not here. Especially if you're not here, because then I'll know I'm doing it for the right reasons." Riley smiled, and it was sad and proud at the same time. "You know what you just said?" "What?" "You just said that you need me to leave so you can prove you don't need me?" The words hit me like a punch to the chest, because she was right, and because the truth of it was more complicated than I wanted to admit. "Maybe," I said, "but maybe that's okay too. Maybe sometimes you have to lose something to understand what it actually meant to you." "And what do I mean to you, Marcus?" I looked at her sitting across from me in our coffee shop, the place where we'd built something beautiful and complicated, and probably impossible. I thought about all the Friday mornings, all the conversations that had changed how I saw the world, all the ways she'd challenged me to become someone I didn't know I could be. "You mean that I learned what it feels like to want to be worthy of someone extraordinary, and now I have to figure out how to want that for myself, even if you're not around to witness it." Riley reached across the table and took my hand one. "More time, Marcus," she said. "I'm going to take the job." Felt my heart break and soar at the same time. "I know," I said, "and I think you should. But I also want you to know something. You said you wanted everything with me, and I said wanting wasn't enough. But I was wrong about one thing." "What?" "I do want everything with you. I want to see what you build, and I want to tell you about the stories I find, and I want to figure out how to love each other from whatever distance we need to become who we're supposed to be." "What does that mean?" Riley smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it was completely uncomplicated. "It means we figure it out as we go. It means we stay in touch and see what happens when we're both pursuing the things that matter to us. It means we trust that if this is real, it can survive some time and space and uncertainty. And if it's not real, then we'll have helped each other become better people, and that's not nothing." I squeezed her hand. "When do you leave? 3 weeks? Just after New Year's?" "Okay." I took a deep breath. "And let's make the most of 3 weeks, and then let's make the most of whatever comes after." Riley leaned across the table and kissed me, soft and quick and full of promise. "Deal," she said. The 3 weeks between Riley's decision and her departure felt both endless and impossibly short. We fell into a routine that was new for us, deliberate time together, mixed with intentional space apart. It was practice. I realized for what we were about to attempt across much greater distances. I threw myself into building the foundation for my restaurant platform. I'd never started a business before, and the learning curve was steep and terrifying. Market research, competitive analysis, user interviews, financial projections, all the unglamorous work that came before writing a single line of code. But for the first time in my career, the difficulty felt energizing rather than draining. My first real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Carlos, the restaurant owner I'd met during my lunch exploration, agreed to let me spend a day working in his kitchen, watching how orders flowed from online platforms to preparation to delivery. What I saw horrified me. "Look at this," Carlos said, showing me the tablet where delivery orders appeared. "Order comes in, I lose 30% to the platform fee. But that's not the worst part. Watch what happens when the driver is late." A notification popped up. "Delivery delayed. Customer refund issued automatically." The platform had charged Carlos the refund fee, plus a penalty for the late delivery that wasn't even his fault. So you lose the food cost, the preparation time, the platform fee, the refund amount, and you get dinged on your reliability rating, said, trying to understand the full scope of the problem. And if my rating drops too low, they push me down in search results, so fewer people see my restaurant. Carlos wiped his hands on his apron, exhausted. It's like paying someone to slowly strangle your business. I spent that evening sketching out a different model, one where restaurants paid a flat monthly fee that covered unlimited orders, where late deliveries didn't trigger automatic penalties, where customer ratings focused on food quality rather than delivery speed. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The next day, I met Riley at a food truck festival in South Lake Union. She was interviewing the owner of a truck that served Korean-Mexican fusion, asking about how food entrepreneurs created community around mobile businesses. "This is Jin," Riley said, introducing me to a woman about our age, with flour-dusted hands and an infectious laugh. She's been running this truck for 2 years, and she's got some fascinating insights about how food creates social connections. Jin turned out to be a former software engineer who'd left tech to start her food truck after realizing she missed cooking with her grandmother's recipes. Her truck wasn't just a business, it was a cultural bridge, introducing Korean flavors. 2 people who'd never tried them while adapting traditional recipes for American palates. "The beautiful thing about food trucks," Jin explained, "is that you're not just serving food, you're creating temporary communities. People wait in line. Together, they share tables, they start conversations with strangers. It's social in a way that delivery apps can never be." Riley filmed Jin explaining how she chose her daily locations based on community events and foot traffic patterns, how she built relationships with regular customers who followed her truck around the city, how she partnered with other food trucks to create collaborative events. Watching Riley work was mesmerizing. She had this ability to ask questions that made people reveal things they didn't know they were thinking. She wasn't just documenting Jin's business model, she was uncovering a philosophy about food, community, and human connection. "Your girlfriend is really good at this," Jin said to me during a break in filming. "She sees the bigger picture, not just what people are doing, but why it matters." That evening, as we walked along the waterfront, I told Riley about my day with Carlos and the breakthrough I'd had about restaurant platform models. "It sounds like you're not just building software," she said. "You're trying to change a whole industry, maybe. Is that crazy?" "It's ambitious, but not crazy." Riley stopped walking and turned to face the water. The sun was setting behind the Olympic Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. You know what I realized today? Watching Jin talk about her food truck? What? She left a tech job to start a food business, but she's still solving problems like an engineer. She's just applying those skills to something she cares about instead of something that makes money. You think that's what I'm doing? I think that's what we're both doing. Taking the skills we have and pointing them toward things that matter. We stood there in comfortable silence. Watching ferries cross the Sound, I realized that this easy partnership of ideas, its way of building on each other's insights, was what I was going to miss most about being physically near. "Riley, can I ask you something?" I said. "Always. Are you scared about leaving? About the new job? About us?" Riley was quiet for a moment. "Terrified," she said finally, "but also excited. And I think that's probably the right combination." "What scares you most? That I'll get out there and realize I'm not as good as I think I am? That all this confidence I've built up is just because I've been working in familiar places with familiar people. And when I'm somewhere completely new, I'll fall apart." I turned to look at her. "That's not going to happen. How can you be sure?" "I've watched you work. You don't just document stories, you discover them. You see connections other people miss. That's not going to disappear because you're in a different city." Riley smiled. "What about you? What scares you most?" I thought about it. Now, that I'll build this whole platform and no one will want to use it. Now, that I'll spend months creating something I think is meaningful. And it'll turn out to be just another piece of software that doesn't actually help anyone. And what if that happens? Then I'll build something else, something better. See Riley bump my shoulder with hers. We'll be fine. The second week moved faster. Riley was deep in pre-production work for her documentary series, researching locations, setting up interviews, coordinating with local fixers in each city she'd be visiting. I was navigating the maze of small business loans and angel investor networks, trying to figure out how to fund a platform that prioritized community benefit over maximum profit. I had coffee with Danny one morning, partly to pick his brain about sustainable business models, but mostly because I'd come to value his perspective on building things that mattered. "You know what's funny?" he said, sketching while we talked. "I spent years designing buildings that would last forever. They all got torn down within a decade because they weren't profitable enough. Now I design buildings that will never get built, and somehow they feel more permanent." "How so?" "Because ideas are harder to demolish than concrete." He showed me his latest drawing, a community center that grew its own food on the roof, with solar panels shaped like leaves and rainwater collection systems that doubled as public art. This building doesn't exist, but the idea of it might inspire someone else to build something similar, maybe better. "So you think it's worth building things even if they fail?" "I think it's worth building things, especially if they might fail, because the only guaranteed failure is not trying." That afternoon, I had my first real investor meeting. A woman named Sandra Chen, who'd made her fortune in early social media platforms and now focused on funding businesses with social impact. I'd sent her my preliminary business plan, and she'd agreed to a 15-minute coffee meeting. "Tell me why this matters," she said, after I'd gone through my pitch about restaurant platform fees and community impact. "Because small restaurants are the heart of neighborhoods," I said. "They're where people gather, where cultures mix, where communities form. But the current delivery model is slowly killing them by extracting value without giving anything back. And you think your platform will save them?" "I think my platform will give them a better option. Whether that saves them depends on a lot of factors I can't control." Sandra leaned back in her chair. "Most entrepreneurs who come to me promise they're going to revolutionize everything. You're telling me you might fail. I'm telling you I'm going to try something that's worth failing at?" She smiled for the first time in our meeting. "Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you. Your financial projections are optimistic, your timeline is aggressive, and you have no experience running a business." My heart sank. "But," she continued, "you understand the real problem you're trying to solve. You're approaching it from a place of genuine concern rather than pure opportunism. That's rare. So, ... So I'm not ready to invest yet, but I'm interested in seeing what you build. Get me a working prototype and 3 restaurants willing to beta test, and we'll talk again." I left that meeting feeling like I'd been challenged, rather than rejected. Sandra had given me clear, achievable goals. I just had to achieve them. Riley's last week in Seattle was a whirlwind of goodbye dinners, equipment shopping, and final interviews for her current project. We managed to carve out one full day together, which we spent hiking in the Cascades, despite the January cold. "I keep thinking about that first conversation we had," Riley said as we walked through snow-covered forests. "When you said you wanted everything with me, feels like a lifetime ago. Does it feel naive now, that wanting?" I considered the question. "No. It feels like the beginning of understanding what everything actually means." "What does it mean?" "It means wanting someone's growth, even when it takes them away from you. It means caring about their dreams, even when you can't be part of them. It means loving who they're becoming, not just who they are right now." Riley stopped walking and pulled me into a hug that was fierce and desperate and full of all the things we hadn't figured out how to say. "I love who you're becoming, too," she whispered into my jacket. The night before Riley left, we didn't do anything special. We ordered takeout from Carlos's restaurant, sat in my apartment, going through her travel checklist, talked about logistics and backup plans and how often we'd video call. It was mundane and domestic and perfect. "There's something I want to give you," Riley said as we were getting ready for bed. She handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a notebook, simple, leather-bound, the kind artists use for sketching. "It's not a journal," she said quickly. "I know you're not the journaling type. I thought maybe you could use it for ideas, sketches, notes about your platform. Something to capture thoughts when they come." I flipped through the blank pages, imagining them filled with wireframes and user flow diagrams and business model sketches. "I love it," I said. But I don't have anything for you. Yes, you do. Riley smiled. You're going to build something meaningful. That's my gift, knowing that you're out there creating something that matters. What if I screw it up and you'll figure out how to unscrew it? Or you'll screw it up beautifully and learn something important. Riley left on a Tuesday morning. I drove her to the airport. We sat in the departures area, drinking terrible coffee and watching other people say their goodbyes. This feels surreal, Riley said. Good surreal or bad surreal? Both, like we're characters in a story we don't know the ending to. Maybe that's the point. Her flight was called. We stood up, and suddenly everything felt final and impossible. I don't know how to say goodbye to you, I admitted. Then don't. Say see you later instead. See you later, Riley Summers. See you later, Marcus Chin. She kissed me once, quick and soft, and then she was walking toward her gate with her camera, equipment, and her determination to document the world's solutions to impossible problems. I drove home in a daze, my apartment suddenly too quiet and too empty. But when I sat down at my computer and opened the notebook Riley had given me, something clicked into place. I started sketching wireframes for the restaurant platform, thinking about user interfaces that would prioritize relationships over efficiency, about payment models that supported community rather than extraction. For the first time since I'd met Riley, I was building something entirely for myself, not to impress her, not to prove I was worthy of her, but because it was what needed. To exist in the world, the loneliness was real and sharp, but underneath it was something I'd never felt before, the satisfaction of working toward something that mattered, regardless of who was watching. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Riley. Landed. In Portland, starting interviews tomorrow. How's the platform coming? I looked at the pages of sketches I'd filled, at the problem-solving momentum that was already building. It's coming, I texted back. Tell me about Portland. And just like that, we began the next chapter. The one where we learned whether love could survive in the spaces between wanting and needing, between being together and growing apart, between the people we were and the people we were becoming. 3 days later, I had my first meeting with Carlos about beta testing the platform. He was skeptical, but interested, willing to try anything that might help him keep his restaurant afloat. As I explained the fee structure and community features, I realized I was no longer building this for Riley, or even for myself. I was building it for Carlos, for Jin, for Mrs. Park and her community garden, for Danny and his impossible architectural dreams. I was building it for all the people trying to create something meaningful in a world that seemed designed to make that as difficult as possible. Riley had been right about wanting versus needing. I'd wanted her validation, her presence, her approval. But what I needed was to become someone who could build something worthy of the problems I wanted to solve. And maybe, if I was very lucky, that would be enough to deserve whatever came next. 6 months after Riley left Seattle, I was sitting in Carlos's restaurant at 2 a.m., surrounded by printouts of user feedback, beta test results, and financial projections that finally made sense. My laptop screen showed 17 restaurants now using my platform, not just in Seattle, but in Portland, San Francisco, and Austin. The numbers were small, but they were real, and they were growing. Carlos emerged from the kitchen with 2 plates of his famous carnitas tacos and sat down across from me. You know what's funny? He said, sliding a plate my way. When you first told me about this platform, I thought you were just another tech guy trying to fix something you didn't understand. What changed your mind? You kept coming back. Not to sell me anything, not to get more data, but to actually understand what wasn't working. Most people pitch you a solution and disappear. You stuck around for the problems. The platform had evolved far beyond my original concept. Instead of just changing the fee structure, we'd built something that helped restaurants understand their customers better, manage inventory more efficiently, and connect with their local communities. Jin's food truck was using it to coordinate with event organizers. Mrs. Park's garden was using the community features to organize volunteer days and crop shares.
House.
The funding situation, Carlos asked. Sandra wants to lead a proper investment round. We're talking about expanding too. 50 cities by the end of the year, Picked up a taco, still amazed by how much had changed. But she has conditions, such as I need to hire a real business team, who actually knows how to scale operations, a marketing director who understands restaurant culture, a customer success manager who can handle support as we grow. Carlos raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you're about to become a real CEO. Sounds terrifying. Best kind of terrifying, though. My phone buzzed with a text from Riley. Just wrapped filming in Asheville. Community solar project is incredible. How's your empire building going? Over the past 6 months, we'd settled into a rhythm of communication that was both more and less than what we'd had in Seattle. Daily texts, weekly video calls, shared articles and photos, and small victories. It was intimate, but not dependent, connected, but not consuming. I texted back, 17 restaurants and counting. Tell me about the solar project. Riley's response came with a photo of a field covered in solar panels, surrounded by houses and community gardens. Entire neighborhood generates their own power and selling surplus back to the grid. Kids learning about renewable energy in school while their families save money on electricity. It's beautiful. When do you finish filming? It's 2 more weeks, then back to Portland for post-production. Series launches in September. I stared at that message for a long moment. Riley had been gone for 6 months, traveling constantly, building something that would reach millions of people. I'd been in Seattle the entire time, building something that helped dozens of restaurants. Both paths felt right, but they also felt impossibly separate, Marcus. Carlos was watching me with that knowing expression he got when he thought I was overthinking something. Yeah, you miss her. It wasn't a question. Every day, but you're not miserable.
No, not miserable.
I considered this. It's more like productive longing. Carlos laughed. Only you would turn missing someone into a business strategy, but he wasn't wrong. The space Riley's absence had created in my life had been filled with work that mattered, relationships that challenged me, growth that felt authentic rather than performative. I missed her constantly, but I also felt more like myself than I ever had before. The next week brought a milestone I'd been working toward for months. Danny, the homeless architect with the impossible drawings, had been hired by a nonprofit to design a tiny house village for transitional housing. His sketches of buildings that worked with natural systems had caught the attention of a housing advocacy group who needed someone who understood both architecture and sustainability. It's not much, Danny said when he called to tell me the news. 12 tiny houses, shared kitchen and bathroom facilities, solar power and rainwater collection, but it's a start. It's everything, I told him. It's proof that your vision can become real. Funny thing is, I never could have imagined this 6 months ago. I was so focused on big corporate projects that I couldn't see how to scale down my ideas instead of scaling up. That conversation stayed with me as I prepared for my own scaling decision. Sandra had scheduled a meeting to discuss the investment terms, and I needed to decide how big I wanted this thing to become. The cautious part of me wanted to grow slowly, organically, staying small enough to maintain the personal relationships that made the platform work. But the ambitious part of me saw the potential to help thousands of restaurants, to maybe even shift how the entire industry thought about community and sustainability. Mrs. Park helped me think through the decision during one of my regular garden volunteer sessions. The spring planting was in full swing, and she was teaching me about companion planting, which vegetables grew better when planted together, which ones protected each other from pests and disease. Plants have much to teach about business. She said as we planted tomatoes next to basil. Basil makes tomatoes taste better. Tomatoes give basil shade. Both plants benefit, but they stay separate, strong in their own roots. So you think I should take the big investment? Thank you. Should ask yourself, will growing bigger help more people or just make you feel more important? It was a question I chewed on for days. The honest answer was both. Helping more restaurants would absolutely create more value in the world. But I also couldn't deny that the ego boost of running a real company appealed to me the night before my meeting with Sandra, Riley called for our weekly video chat. She looked tired but energized, sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room in Asheville. You look different, she said when the call connected. Different how? More ... settled? Like you're not trying to prove anything anymore? I thought about that. 6 months ago. Every conversation with Riley had felt like an audition. Was I smart enough, thoughtful enough, worthy enough of her attention? Now, talking to her felt like talking to my best friend about the most important parts of my life. I think you're right, I said. I stopped trying to become someone you'd want and started trying to become someone I could respect. And who is that person? Someone who builds things that help people. Someone who asks better questions. Someone who doesn't need to have all the answers as long as he's working on the right problems. Riley smiled, and it was the warm, uncomplicated smile I remembered from our early coffee shop mornings. I'm proud of you, Marcus. I'm proud of you too. This documentary series is going to change how people think about community solutions. We make a good team, even from different time zones. Speaking of which, I have news. Sandra wants to invest. Scale the platform to 50 cities, hire a real team, the whole thing. That's incredible. How do you feel about it? Excited, terrified. Uncertain about whether I can handle that much responsibility. What does your gut tell you? I was quiet for a moment, listening to the instinct I'd been learning to trust. That I should do it, but carefully. Grow big enough to help more people, but not so big that I lose track of why it matters. Sounds like you know your answer. What about you? When do I get to see this documentary series? Riley's expression shifted and became more serious. Actually, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. The series is getting a lot of pre-launch attention. Film festivals, media interviews, possible distribution deals. My producer thinks I should move to Los Angeles after post-production and be available for meetings and follow-up projects. My stomach dropped. Los Angeles. It would just be for a year, maybe 2, to see if I can build a bigger platform for this kind of work. That makes sense, I said, and meant it, even though something inside me was screaming. Marcus, can I ask you something? Always. If I asked you to come with me, what would you say? The question hung in the digital space between us. 6 months ago, I would have said yes immediately, would have dropped everything to follow Riley wherever her dreams led. Now, the answer was more complicated. I would say that I love you enough to want you to go, and I love what I'm building here enough to want to stay. Riley nodded, and I could see her absorbing the weight of that truth. And if I asked you to wait for me, I would say that I'll always be here if you need me, but I won't put my life on hold waiting for you to come back. Even though that might mean we never figure out how to be together. Even though we talked for another hour about logistics and timelines and the practical realities of maintaining a relationship across even greater distances. It was the most adult conversation I'd ever had about love. Honest about what we wanted. Realistic about what we could promise. Open about what we couldn't control. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling hollowed out and strangely peaceful at the same time. I'd just had a conversation that might have ended my relationship with the most important person in my life, and instead of panic, I felt clarity. The next morning, I met Sandra at a coffee shop downtown, not the one where Riley and I had spent our Friday mornings, but a new place that served fair trade coffee and hosted community meetings in the back room, so Sandra said. After we'd covered the business terms, what's your long-term vision for this platform? Honestly, I want to put the big delivery apps out of business, not by beating them at their own game, but by proving there's a better game to play. Sandra laughed. It's either incredibly naive or incredibly ambitious. Why can't it be both? Fair point. What does success look like to you in 5 years? I thought about Carlos and his thriving restaurant, about Jin expanding her food truck into a brick-and-mortar location. About Mrs. Park's garden, inspiring similar projects in every neighborhood where our platform operated. 1,000 restaurants using the platform profitably. 100 communities that are more connected because of the food businesses we've helped support. A model that other industries can adapt for their own community-focused platforms. And personally, what does success look like for your life? Building something that matters more than building something that makes me rich. Having relationships that challenge me to grow instead of relationships that just make me comfortable. Being someone who can love people enough to want their dreams, even when those dreams don't include me. Sandra was quiet for a moment, making notes on her tablet. Marcus, I've funded a lot of companies, and I've met a lot of entrepreneurs. Most of them want to change the world to get what they want. You seem to want to change yourself to serve what the world needs. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for your investment? It's the reason I'm going to say yes. We spent the next 2 hours going through term sheets and growth projections and hiring timelines. By the time we shook hands, I was the CEO of a real company with real funding and real responsibility for other people's livelihoods. That afternoon, I called my sister Emma to tell her the news. Holy shit, Marcus, you're actually doing it. You're building a company. We're building a company. I'm going to need help with everything from HR policies to office space to figuring out how to be a boss. I'm so proud of you. And honestly, kind of amazed. A year ago, you were the most risk-averse person I knew. What changed? You met someone who showed you it was possible to want bigger things. And then I had to learn to want them for myself. Is she coming back for the launch? Party. I hadn't even thought about a launch party, but suddenly it seemed important. I don't know. Let's go. She might be moving to Los Angeles. And how do you feel about that? It's like I hope she gets everything she wants, even if it's not me. Emma was quiet. For a moment, Marcus, that might be the most grown-up thing you've ever said. That evening, I walked through Pike Place Market, past the fish throwers and flower vendors and artisans who'd been building community through commerce for over a century. I thought about all the small businesses that made Seattle feel like a place where people knew each other, where relationships mattered as much as transactions. My phone rang. Riley saw the news. She said without preamble.
Oh.
Carlos posted on Instagram about the investment. Marcus, that's incredible. Thank you. How did your final interviews go? Really well? But Marcus, I need to tell you something. My heart jumped. Okay. I've been thinking about our conversation last night about Los Angeles and what comes next. And I realized I was asking you the wrong question. What should you have asked? I should have asked what would make you happy, not what you would do for me. I stopped walking, standing in the middle of the busy market while people flowed around me. What would make me happy is knowing that you're building the biggest, most important version of your work, even if that means you're 3,000 miles away. And what would make me happy is knowing that you're building something sustainable and meaningful, something that can grow and help more people over time. Even if that means staying in Seattle without me, so we're both going to choose our work over our relationship, O'Reilly said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. We're both going to choose to become the people who can build the things that matter to us. And maybe, if we do that well enough, we'll figure out how to choose each other too, from different cities. From wherever we need to be to do our best work. Riley? Yeah? I love you. Not the version of you that fits into my life, but the version of you that's too big for anyone's life but your own. I love you too, Marcus. All the versions of you, the careful one, the ambitious one, the one who's brave enough to build something that might fail. So what happens now? Now we see what we can build, apart and together. We text each other victories and failures. We video call when we need perspective. We visit when we can. Trust that if this is real, it can handle some distance and uncertainty. If it's not real, then we'll have helped each other become people who can love the right person when they come along. 3 months later, standing in the community room of Jin's new restaurant, she'd expanded from food truck to brick and mortar, using a small business loan facilitated through our platform's partnership network surrounded by restaurant owners, community organizers, and the small but growing team I'd hired to help scale our work. We were celebrating reaching 50 restaurants across 12 cities. But more importantly, we were celebrating the stories those numbers represented. Carlos had hired 2 new employees and was planning a second location. Mrs. Park's garden had inspired 3 similar projects in neighborhoods where our restaurant partners were located. Danny's tiny house village was under construction, and he'd been commissioned to design 2 more. My phone buzzed with a text from Riley. Watching your launch party on Jin's Instagram Live? You look happy? I looked around the room at all these people who were building things that mattered, who were choosing community over efficiency, relationship over transaction. I thought about Riley in Portland, finishing post-production on a documentary series. That would inspire thousands of communities to solve their own problems. I texted back, I am happy. Are you happy? Getting there? LA meetings next week, but I think I'm going to base myself in Portland and just travel for specific projects. Turns out I do my best work when I'm rooted somewhere. Maybe I should visit Portland sometime. You. No, to research expanding the platform to Oregon. Maybe you should. I know some great restaurants that might be interested in your community-focused approach, Riley. Yeah, I think we figured it out. Figured out. It's how to be everything each other needs, instead of just everything each other wants. Difference? I looked around the room again, at all the people who'd taught me that wanting someone and loving someone weren't the same thing, that needing someone and depending on someone were different forms of connection. The difference is that what I want changes based on my mood, my fears, my ego, but what I need is constant. I need you to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be building the biggest version of your dreams, even when that's hard for me, especially when that's hard for me. And what I need is for you to be someone who can love me from whatever distance allows us both to grow. Someone who can celebrate my successes even when they take me away from you. So we need each other to be happy apart so we can choose to be together. We need each other to be whole people so that when we are together, we're sharing abundance instead of trying to fill emptiness. 6 months later, Riley moved back to Seattle. Not for me, but because she'd gotten a grant to start a nonprofit focused on community-led climate solutions. And Seattle was the perfect base for the kind of collaborative work she wanted to do. I helped her find an apartment 3 neighborhoods away from mine, close enough to see each other regularly, far enough away to maintain our separate lives. We still met for coffee on Friday mornings, but now we also met for dinner on Tuesdays. Weekend hikes and quiet Sunday mornings reading in the same room. We talked about our work, our dreams, our fears, our growth. We challenged each other and supported each other and loved each other from a place of choice rather than need. You know what's funny? Riley said one Friday morning, almost 2 years, after our first conversation in this same coffee shop, I used to think wanting everything with someone was about possession. Like if you wanted everything, you wanted to own all of someone's time, attention, dreams. What do you think it means now? I think wanting everything means wanting someone's happiness, growth, success, fulfillment, all of it, even the parts that don't include you, especially the parts that don't include you. I reached across the table and took her hand. And what do you think needing someone means? Needing someone means requiring them to be who they actually are, not who you want. Them to be, needing them to grow and change and become more themselves, even when that's inconvenient for your relationship. So when you said then be everything I need that night at dinner, ... I was asking you to be someone who could love me for who I was becoming, not just who I was right then, someone who could want my dreams even when they scared you. And did I become that person? Riley smiled and squeezed my hand. You became someone even better. You became someone who could want your own dreams and love me enough to want mine too. So we figured it out. The difference between want and need. We figured out that they're not opposites. They're the same thing, just from different perspectives. I want everything with you because I need you to be everything you're capable of becoming. And you need me to want my own everything because that's what makes me someone worth wanting everything with. I looked at her sitting across from me, this brilliant, challenging, possible woman who taught me that love wasn't about finding someone who completed you, but about becoming someone who could love completely. Riley, yeah? I want everything. With you, I know. And Marcus, yeah, I'm everything you need. She was right, not because she was perfect, not because she filled some hole in my life, but because she was exactly who she was. Someone who dreamed big, worked hard, loved fearlessly, and challenged everyone around her to become more than they thought possible. And for the first time since I'd met her, I knew that I was everything she needed too. Not because I was perfect, but because I'd learned to love her dreams as much as my own. To want her growth even when it was inconvenient. To need her to be fully herself, even when that self was too big to fit comfortably into any relationship. We'd found our answer. Not in wanting less, but in needing better. Not in becoming smaller to fit together, but in becoming bigger to deserve each other. Not in choosing love over dreams, but in choosing to dream big enough that love could grow inside our ambitions. Instead of competing with them, Everything we wanted. Everything we needed. Everything we'd learned to give each other by first learning to give it to ourselves. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.